The world wanted to bring Russia to its knees. When tanks crossed into Ukraine in 2022, Western powers launched an economic war like no other. Sanctions piled on. Oil was targeted. Banks were frozen. Russia was cut off from the global financial bloodstream. They thought it would break the Kremlin. But 2 years into the war, Russia's economy is still standing. Factories are running. Oil is still flowing. Rubles are being exchanged for missiles. The sanctions were supposed to stop the war. Instead, they forced the birth of something far more dangerous: a self-reliant, militarized economy thriving in isolation. This is not a comeback story. It's a survival blueprint. For decades, the Western world believed in the power of economic deterrence, that if you hit a country hard enough through banks, trade, and finance, it would eventually cave. That modern war couldn't survive without modern markets. But Vladimir Putin bet on a different idea: that Russia could survive alone no matter what. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine triggered a historic response. More than 13,000 sanctions, $300 billion in central bank reserves frozen. Over 1,000 Western companies, Apple, McDonald's, Shell, and more, pulled out overnight. And yet, despite the most intense economic punishment ever levied on a major nation, Russia did not collapse. Instead, it adapted, it rewired, it weaponized the very thing meant to destroy it, its own economy. This is the inside story of how Russia has defied the rules of globalization and what that means for the rest of the world. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the West responded with unity. NATO members rallied. Billions of dollars in military and humanitarian aid flowed to Kyiv. Sanctions hit fast and hard. At first, it looked like a united front, but cracks soon began to appear. A single phone call in 2023 between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin sent shockwaves across the geopolitical map. Trump hinted at ending U.S. support for Ukraine, signaling to the world that American commitment was only conditional. That shift rattled Europe. If the U.S. backs down, can the EU shoulder the burden alone? In Poland, Germany, and the Baltic states, military spending surged. Cold War-era bunkers were reactivated. Sweden and Finland abandoned decades of neutrality and joined NATO. Russia, in turn, redeployed nuclear-capable missiles near its western borders. A flashback. The 20th century arms race had returned. Only this time, it was economic, diplomatic, and digital. A second Cold War had just begun, but this time, Russia wasn't going to play by Western rules. On paper, the sanctions were devastating. Major Russian banks were blacklisted. Visa and MasterCard pulled out. The Moscow Stock Exchange froze trading. Luxury goods, technology components, aircraft parts, even cat food, everything was blocked. Yet within months, the Kremlin rolled out a counteroffensive. Not on the battlefield, but inside spreadsheets. The central bank hiked interest rates from 9.5% to 20% overnight to stabilize the ruble. The currency, which had plunged in March 2022, rebounded within weeks. Foreign investors, frozen out, were replaced by domestic institutions. And then came capital controls. Russians couldn't move money abroad. Exports were priced in rubles. Foreign companies that stayed were forced to sell stakes at deep discounts or partner with Kremlin-friendly oligarchs. What may have looked like economic suicide was, in fact, tactical survival. Initially, the economy shrank by 2.1 in 2022. But by 2023, it was already recovering. The International Monetary Fund predicted Russian GDP growth at 2.2% for 2024. Higher than Germany or the UK. How? One word: oil. You see, Russia is the third largest oil producer in the world and holds the largest natural gas reserves. Before the war, Europe bought nearly half of Russia's fossil fuel exports. But of course, the sanctions forced a pivot. The Kremlin redirected its barrels east. India, once a negligible buyer, now imports 35 to 40% of its crude oil from Russia. often at discounted prices. China increased its intake of Russian gas through the power of Siberia pipeline and new Arctic routes, and crucially, the transactions no longer flowed through Western banks. In 2022, just 0.5% of Russia's export payments were made in Chinese yuan. But by 2024, that figure had exploded to nearly 40%. The dollar was dethroned. Well, at least in Moscow's world. Russian energy was still on the global market, but it now traveled along new routes, traded in new currencies, and served new masters. Even under sanctions, Russia was earning an estimated $10 billion a month from oil sales. With Western markets closed and domestic industry struggling, Russia leaned into war. Defense spending soared, reaching nearly 30% of the national budget by early 2024. Factories that once produced car parts now make drones. Metallurgy plants build tank armor. Universities pivoted research toward missile systems and cyber warfare tools. The state absorbed the economy. Government contracts kept businesses alive. Civilian industries were reshaped to serve military logistics. And anyone who could not adapt, they disappeared. Companies that previously made yogurt started producing ration kits. Tech startups were redirected into surveillance software and battlefield communications. In short, Russia did not militarize its army. In an unprecedented, it militarized its economy. However, of course, this transformation came with a cost. By late 2023, Russia faced its worst labor shortage in 2 decades. Millions of workers have either fled the country, been drafted, or shifted into defense production. Restaurants and service industries struggled to stay open. Tech companies couldn't find programmers. Farmers lacked truck drivers and seasonal labor. Hence, inflation exploded. The official rate hovered around 7%, but food prices surged by double digits. For instance, a loaf of bread in Moscow now costs twice what it did in 2021. And what was regarded as essential, like baby formula, tampons, insulin, all became luxury items. To mask the pain, the Kremlin flooded the economy with subsidies. Utility prices were capped. Pension payments rose. But the budget was bleeding. Still, the government kept the deficit under 3%, a sign not of strength, but of ruthless spending discipline. And due to that, the ordinary Russian is living in a new reality. Now that Western products are all but gone, the Russian markets with all their products had been almost entirely replaced. IKEA, Nike, Starbucks, and many others had been replaced by domestic knockoffs or Asian substitutes. Imported cars are now Chinese. Social media is state-controlled. Most news is filtered through propaganda channels. And yet, public dissent is rare. Not because people are content, but because protest means prison. Over 20,000 Russians have been arrested for anti-war activity since 2022. Independent media outlets like Novaya Gazeta have been shut down. Journalists are routinely jailed. State-controlled polls suggest 70% of Russians support the war. But the truth is harder to measure in a country where fear is currency. And yet, beneath all the silence, there are many cracks. Its economy is too narrow. Its innovation pipeline is dying. Its population is aging and shrinking. Over 1.3 million people, many of them young and educated, have left since the war began. Private investment has collapsed. Foreign capital is gone. Real wages are failing, especially outside major cities. And despite all the spin, Russia is now more dependent on China than ever before, both economically and strategically. Beijing buys the oil, supplies the tech, and watches closely. Because for China, Russia isn't just a partner, it's a test case. And now the big question is, can an authoritarian economy survive total isolation? While Russia is going up and down in a spiral, Ukraine meanwhile lies in ruins. Over 150,000 civilian and casualties. Infrastructure damages in the hundreds of billions. In fact, the reconstruction bill is estimated to exceed $1 trillion. All that, and the war is still not over. Now, the United States remains a deciding force while European unity is fragile. Global inflation, food insecurity, and refugee crisis all ripple outward from this one conflict. Russia's economy did not collapse, but in surviving, it revealed a darker truth. Sanctions can't stop a war that a regime is willing to survive at any cost. They did not bring peace, they built a bunker. And inside that bunker, the Kremlin is still writing its own rules. What do you think? Will the Russian economy survive this war, or will it collapse suddenly and entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell.